210 cookware companies were just forced by law to answer one question. Do your pans contain forever chemicals? 82 of them said yes, and the way they said it tells you more than the answer itself. This is a real list. A nonprofit called Defend Our Health went through the public disclosures of more than 200 cookware brands and compiled them into a searchable directory. Of the 210 they checked, 149 gave a clear yes or no answer. 82 of those, about 40%, disclosed that their products contain intentionally added PFAS, not accused, not tested by an outsider, disclosed by the companies themselves. So before you go throw out every pan in your kitchen, stop. Because the word contain is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. And the difference between what it sounds like and what it actually means is the entire point of this video. I'm not here to read you the list. I'm here to teach you how to read it, the way a toxicologist reads it. By the end, you'll be able to open one of these disclosures and know exactly what it is and isn't telling you. Let's start with the obvious question. Why does this list exist at all? Companies don't usually volunteer that their product contains a chemical class that's been in the headlines for a decade. The answer is a California law called AB 1200, the Safer Food Packaging and Cookware Act of 2021. It does two things that matter here. First, since January 2023 on their websites, and since January 2024 on the physical label, cookware makers selling in California have to disclose if their product contains any chemical from a state-designated list, and PFAS are on that list. That's where these disclosures come from. They're not marketing, they're a legal requirement. The second thing AB 1200 does is quieter and cleverer. It regulates the phrase free of. Under the law, a company can't slap PFOA-free or PFAS-free on a pan if any chemical from that same class was intentionally added. In plain terms, you can't clear your name on one specific forever chemical while quietly using its cousin. California's Attorney General has already put companies on notice that it's watching those claims. So PFOA-free, a phrase you've probably seen on 100 pans, is now a regulated claim, not a free-form brag. Hold on to that because it comes back later. Now the part that actually matters, how to read one of these entries without panicking or being fooled. There are two words you're looking for, and one distinction almost nobody explains. The two words are intentionally added. That's the legal trigger. It means the manufacturer deliberately put a PFAS-based material into the product to do a job, and in cookware, that job is almost always the non-stick coating. The most common one is PTFE, polytetrafluoroethylene, the material the brand name Teflon is built on. PTFE is a fluoropolymer, and fluoropolymers are chemically part of the broad PFAS family. So when a nonstick pan discloses intentionally added PFAS, what it is usually telling you is, this pan has a PTFE-type coating. That's it. That's often the whole disclosure. And here's the distinction that changes everything. PTFE, as it sits on your pan, is a polymer, a large, stable, locked-up molecule. It is not the same thing as the small, mobile PFAS chemicals like PFOA and PFOS that you've read about contaminating drinking water and building up in human blood. Those smaller compounds are the ones public health agencies have flagged. PTFE itself is polymerized and largely inert at normal cooking temperatures. A disclosure that says contains PFAS does not by itself tell you that anything is migrating off that pan and into your food under normal use. Contains is a statement about what's in the object. It is not a measurement of your exposure. Those are two different questions, and almost every headline collapses them into one. That gap between hazard and exposure is the single most important idea in this whole topic, so let's actually stand at the stove and work through it. Hazard is the property of a substance. Could this thing cause harm in principle? Exposure is the dose that actually reaches you. How much? By what route? Under what conditions? Risk is the two combined. A shark is a hazard. A shark on television is not a risk. The mistake people make with cookware is reading a hazard label and feeling an exposure. So what does the exposure data actually say for a PTFE pan? A few concrete things. At normal cooking temperatures, say up to around medium-high, a few hundred degrees Fahrenheit, an intact PTFE coating is stable. The well-documented concern is overheating. Take an empty nonstick pan and blast it on high heat until it climbs past roughly 500 degrees Fahrenheit, and the coating can begin to degrade and release fumes. That's the origin of the "it can make pet birds sick" warnings, which are real. Birds have extraordinarily sensitive respiratory systems. The practical lesson isn't throw out the pan. It's don't preheat an empty nonstick pan on high and use ventilation. That single habit addresses most of the realistic exposure pathway. The second pathway is abrasion, scraping a metal spatula across a scratched coating, and the flaking that follows. Swallowed PTFE flakes are generally considered to pass through largely inertly, but a badly scratched pan is worn out anyway, so the sane response is to replace pans when the coating is visibly damaged. Notice what I'm not saying. I'm not saying this pan poisons you. I'm not telling you your Tuesday night eggs gave you a disease. The honest scientific position is narrower and more useful. Certain PFAS compounds are associated, in epidemiological studies and regulatory assessments, with effects on things like cholesterol, immune response, and some cancers. And the responsible goal is to reduce unnecessary exposure to the mobile ones, not to panic over the presence of an inert polymer. Which brings us to the law, because the reason you're navigating this yourself instead of a regulator handling it is that the rules are a patchwork and they're moving in different directions at once. Start with the states that actually banned sales. Maine passed a law making it illegal as of January 1st, 2026 to sell cookware and many other consumer products with intentionally added PFAS in the state, and that ban is the reason this whole directory exists. Defend Our Health is based in Maine. They started checking shelves to monitor compliance, and the list grew out of that. Minnesota has its own sweeping restriction, often called Amara's Law, phasing PFAS out of many product categories. So in some states, intentionally added PFAS isn't a disclosure. It's a sales prohibition. Now contrast that with California, which is where it gets counterintuitive. In 2025, the California legislature passed SB 682, a bill that would have banned PFAS in cookware and several other product categories outright. On October 13, 2025, Governor Newsom vetoed it. His stated reason was cost, concern about the impact on affordable cooking products. So California, the state whose disclosure law created this transparency in the first place, currently does not ban the chemicals it makes companies disclose. Transparency, yes. Prohibition, no. That's not a contradiction in the data, it's just two different policy choices sitting side by side. And then there's Europe as the contrast case. The European Union is evaluating a universal PFAS restriction, an attempt to regulate the entire class at once, rather than one compound and one product category at a time. It's still in process, and it's genuinely contested. But the ambition is a category-wide rule of exactly the kind the United States has so far chosen not to pass at the federal level. 3 jurisdictions, 3 philosophies ban the sale, disclose but allow, or regulate the whole class. None of them is bound by the other's clock. So how do you actually shop without either panicking or being marketed to? Here's the matrix I'd use. First, decide what you're optimizing for. If your goal is to avoid PTFE-type coatings entirely, that's a legitimate choice, and it's easy. You're looking at stainless steel, cast iron, and carbon steel, none of which use fluoropolymer coatings. If your goal is convenience with managed exposure, a PTFE pan used at moderate heat, with ventilation and retired when scratched, is a defensible choice. And the exposure science supports that being low risk under those conditions. Both of those are rational. What isn't rational is buying a non-stick pan and then being surprised it discloses PFAS. Non-stick, in the conventional sense, largely is the disclosure. Second, read the free of claims with new eyes. Thanks to AB 1200, PFAS-free is now a regulated statement, but PFOA-free and PTFE-free mean very specific, narrow things. PFOA-free tells you about one legacy chemical that's already been phased out industry-wide, so on a new pan, it's close to meaningless. PFAS-free. If the company is being truthful under a law that can be enforced, is the stronger claim. It should mean no fluoropolymer coating at all. Learn to tell the narrow brag from the meaningful one. Third, use the disclosure as a tool, not a verdict. When you see intentionally added PFAS on a non-stick pan, translate it in your head to PTFE coating. Manage the heat, mind the scratches. When you see it somewhere you didn't expect, that's your cue to look closer. The disclosure isn't the danger. It's the flashlight. And if you take one idea from this, a label that tells you a chemical is present is answering a different question than, is this harming me? Presence is not dose. Hazard is not risk. The companies were made to tell you what's in the pan. What that means for you depends on how you use it, and now you know how to read the difference. That distinction, presence versus exposure, is exactly why I made an earlier video on why PFOA-free is the wrong label to trust, and it pairs directly with this one. It's on screen now. The bigger fight, the EU's attempt to regulate all of PFAS as a single class, is the subject I'll take on next. This channel exists to tell you what the evidence and the regulatory record actually say, not what the front of the box says. If you want the next one, subscribing is how you get it. I'll see you in the next one.